killed. It was considered a cold case because there was a lawsuit being waged against the city of Los Angeles and against the police department, and there was
For nearly 30 years, the truth about Tupac Shakur's death has remained hidden in the shadows. Now, a retired LAPD detective is breaking his silence, ready to reveal what really happened that fatal night in Las Vegas. Why has he waited this long? What explosive secrets is he about to expose? Join us as we uncover the confession that could finally solve hip-hop's greatest mystery. The interview he never planned to give. The room is small and plain, with nothing on the walls except a clock that ticks too loudly. An interviewer sits with a man in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. His hair is gray now, thinning at the top, his shoulders slightly hunched from the weight of time and memory. His hands rest on the table like they are holding him steady. Like without them, he might drift away into the past he has been running from. He used to be a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, one of many who worked the streets when hip-hop was rising and the West Coast felt like it was on fire. Back then, he wore a badge with pride, carried a gun, followed orders, and believed he was doing the right thing. Now, he wears a plain shirt and jeans. No badge, no authority. Just an old man with a story that refuses to let him go. He does not look like a man who wants to be here, but he came anyway. His eyes are tired, the kind of tired that sleep cannot fix, the kind that comes from carrying something dark for too long. He has agreed to this interview after years of saying no, years of staying quiet, years of pretending he could forget what he knows. The interviewer asks him why now, why after all this time. The man takes a slow breath, glances down at the recorder on the table, and admits that guilt is a strange thing. Oh, it does not fade with time, he says. It just gets heavier, like a stone you carry in your chest that grows a little bit each year. He thought retirement would bring peace, but instead it brought more silence, and that silence became unbearable. He never planned to give this interview. He turned down reporters for decades, ignored phone calls from journalists, avoided old colleagues who wanted to talk about the past. But something changed recently. Maybe age, maybe conscience, maybe the realization that he does not have many years left to make this right. I should have spoken back then. The former detective began slowly, his voice low and careful, like he is testing each word before letting it go into the world. He talks about the years after he left the force, how he thought distance would help him move on from everything he had seen and done. It did not work that way. Every September, when the anniversary comes around, he feels it again, that pull, that reminder of what happened and what he failed to do. The interviewer asks if he has regrets. The man nods without hesitation, his jaw tightening as he speaks. He says he should have spoken back then, when it mattered, when people were still paying attention, when the investigation was still fresh and the public still cared enough to demand answers. But fear kept him quiet, and so did loyalty to his brothers in blue, and so did the unspoken rules of the department that everyone understood but nobody talked about. He explains that what the public believes about Tupac is not the full truth, not even close. The headlines, the documentaries, the endless conspiracy theories on the internet, they all circle around the same ideas, the same names, the same tired narratives. But none of them get to the heart of what really happened. Some of them come close, he admits, brushing the edge of the truth, but they miss the details that matter most, the small moments that changed everything. The detective pauses, rubbing his hands together slowly, like he is trying to warm them, though the room is not cold. He says there were mistakes made, not just on the night everyone remembers, but long before that, months before, maybe even years before. Decisions that seemed small at the time, routine even, but ended up shaping everything that came after, like dominoes falling in slow motion. He was part of that system, part of those decisions, and that is something he has had to live with every single day since. He looks directly at the interviewer now, his expression tired but steady, his voice firm. He says he is ready to tell the truth, not because it will bring Tupac back or change the past, but because staying silent any longer feels like being part of the lie that unalived him, the name that still keeps him awake. The interviewer leans forward and says the name out loud, Tupac Shakur. The detective flinches slightly, like hearing it spoken in this room makes it more real, makes what he is about to confess more permanent. He nods slowly, acknowledging that yes, this is about him, This is about that night. This is about everything that happened before and after. He explains that Tupac was different from other cases he worked on during his career. It was not just another shooting, not just another body on the street, not just another file to close and forget. Tupac's fame made everything louder, messier, more complicated than anything he had dealt with before. The media descended like vultures within hours, cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions, the whole world watching and waiting for answers. But it was more than just the attention, he says. There was something about Tupac himself, the way he lived, the way he spoke, the way he challenged everything and everyone. The detective admits he did not understand Tupac back then, did not understand the music or the culture, or why so many people loved him so deeply. To the department, Tupac was trouble, a thug with a record, someone who made their jobs harder. The detective rubs his face with both hands, exhausted just from talking about it. He pauses, staring at nothing in particular, lost in a memory that still feels fresh, despite nearly 3 decades passing. The interviewer waits, letting the silence stretch. Finally, the detective speaks again, saying that to understand what happened to Tupac, you have to go back to Las Vegas, back to that weekend, back to when everything started falling apart. Going back to Las Vegas. The detective closes his eyes and takes himself back to September of 1996. Las Vegas was electric that weekend, he says, the kind of energy that makes the whole city feel like it is vibrating. Tupac arrived for the Mike Tyson fight, and everyone knew he was there. Everyone felt his presence even if they did not see him directly. He describes how Tupac rolled into Vegas with Death Row Records, with Suge Knight, with an entourage that filled multiple cars and hotel suites. There was money everywhere, champagne flowing, people celebrating like they owned the world. On the surface, it looked like success, like victory, like the peak of everything Tupac had worked for. But underneath, the detective says, there was tension thick enough to cut. The detective explains that by this point in 1996, the East Coast-West Coast rivalry was not just music anymore. It had become something darker, something dangerous. Biggie Smalls had been unalived months earlier. Though the detective corrects himself, that came later, he's getting his timeline confused. He shakes his head, frustrated with his own memory, then continues. What mattered, he says, is that Tupac was living on the edge. He had been shot before, survived prison, survived betrayal. And now he was angrier than ever, more reckless, more willing to take risks. The people around him were not helping, they were feeding into it, encouraging it, using his anger for their own purposes. The detective describes the MGM Grand that night, the fight, the crowd, the chaos of thousands of people packed into one building. Tupac was in the middle of it all, visible, loud, untouchable in his own mind. But the detective says that security was concerned. People were watching Tupac closely, not just fans but others, people with intentions that were not friendly. He talks about the energy in the air, the way tension can build in a crowd without anyone saying a word. Something felt off that night, he says. Even before the fight ended, even before Tupac left the arena, it was the kind of feeling that makes experienced cops pay attention, the kind that makes your instincts scream that something bad is coming. But nobody stopped it, nobody intervened, and that is something the detective says he will regret for the rest of his life. Moments that felt small, back then. Still sitting in the interview room, the detective shifts in his chair and begins to recall the smaller details. The moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but later became the pieces that explained everything. He talks about what happened after the Tyson fight ended, when Tupac and his crew were moving through the MGM Grand, riding high on adrenaline and victory. There was a confrontation, he says, his voice dropping lower. Someone from a rival gang was spotted in the casino. Someone Tupac and his people recognized, someone who represented everything they were fighting against on the streets. Words were exchanged, then it became physical. A beating that happened fast and brutal, caught on the casino's security cameras for the whole world to see later. The detective explains that this moment, this fight in the MGM, was the spark that lit the fuse. At the time, it looked like just another scuffle, another example of Tupac's temper getting the best of him. Another headline waiting to happen. Security broke it up quickly, people scattered, and within minutes it seemed like it was over. Just another forgotten incident in a city full of them. But it was not over, the detective says, shaking his head slowly. That confrontation sent a message. It disrespected the wrong people. It crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. In the world Tupac was living in, respect and reputation meant everything. And what happened in that casino was a direct challenge that demanded a response. The detective admits that law enforcement knew about the fight almost immediately. They saw the tapes. They knew who was involved, but nobody treated it as a serious threat. It was just Tupac being Tupac. Just another case of celebrity drama that would blow over by morning. There were no arrests made, no extra security assigned, no warnings given to anyone in Tupac's camp about possible retaliation. Looking back now, the detective says this was one of the failures that haunts him most. The warning signs were there, clear as day, visible to anyone paying attention. A violent confrontation with gang members in a city where tensions were already high, involving one of the most famous and controversial figures in music. It should have been treated as a serious threat, but instead, it was brushed aside. He pauses, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Those moments that felt small back then, he says quietly, turned out to be the most important moments of all. The drive that changed everything. The detective takes a deep breath and moves forward in the story. His voice steady now, like he is committed to telling everything no matter how painful it becomes. He describes what happened after the confrontation at the MGM. After Tupac and his crew left the casino and headed toward Club 662, where a party was waiting, Tupac got into a black BMW with Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, the man who had bailed him out of prison, the man who controlled much of his career at that point. They were supposed to go straight to the club, supposed to celebrate, supposed to keep the night going like nothing had happened. But Las Vegas is unpredictable, and the streets were busy that night with traffic and tourists. The detective explains that they were driving down Las Vegas Boulevard, music probably playing loud, windows down, Tupac visible to anyone who looked closely enough. The car stopped at a red light near the intersection of Flamingo Road, surrounded by other vehicles. Just another moment in what seemed like an ordinary night. Then everything changed in seconds. A white Cadillac pulled up alongside the BMW, the detective says, his voice quieter now. The details of what happened next have been told 1,000 different ways, but the core truth remains the same. Someone in that Cadillac opened fire, bullets tearing through the night, shattering glass, ripping through metal and flesh without mercy. Tupac was hit multiple times, the detective explains, his body taking rounds that no one could survive for long. Suge Knight was grazed but mostly unharmed, able to drive away from the scene even as Tupac bled beside him. The white Cadillac disappeared into the night, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, leaving chaos and confusion behind. The detective describes how the BMW sped away, how bystanders screamed and scattered, how, within minutes, police and ambulances flooded the area. Tupac was rushed to the hospital, barely conscious, fighting for his life, while the world waited and prayed and demanded answers that no one could give. He pauses, staring down at his hands. The drive that changed everything, he says, lasted less than 5 minutes from the MGM to that intersection. 5 minutes that ended one life and destroyed so many others. 5 minutes that the world is still talking about almost 3 decades later. What the police saw and what they missed. Back in the interview room, the detective shifts his weight and admits that the investigation never had a clean start from the very beginning. He explains that when police arrived at the scene, chaos was everywhere. Witnesses were panicking, and the only clear evidence was blood on the street and bullet holes in a car. Tupac was already on his way to the hospital, so there was no victim to interview, no statement to take, no immediate answers about who shot him or why. Suge Knight refused to cooperate with police, claiming he saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing, despite being in the car when it happened. That set the tone for everything that followed, the detective says, a wall of silence that went up immediately. The detective describes how witnesses at the scene gave conflicting stories. Some said they saw the white Cadillac. Others said it was a different car entirely. Some claimed that there were 2 shooters. Others said just one. Nobody could agree on which direction the Cadillac went after the shooting. Nobody got a license plate number. Nobody saw the faces of the people inside clearly enough to identify them later. Evidence collection was messy, the detective admits. The scene was contaminated quickly by crowds and traffic. Shell casings were recovered, but fingerprints were impossible. The BMW was impounded, but it told them nothing they did not already know. Surveillance cameras in the area either were not working or did not capture the right angles, leaving investigators with almost nothing concrete to work with. But the biggest problem, he says, was not the lack of evidence. It was the lack of cooperation. Tupac's entourage refused to talk. Death row records refused to help. Witnesses from the hip-hop community stayed silent out of fear or loyalty, or both. The code of the streets was stronger than any pressure the police could apply, and that code said, "You do not talk to cops, no matter what." The detective explains that within days, the investigation stalled, leads went nowhere, tips dried up, and the case became colder by the hour. Pressure from the media was intense. Everyone wanted answers, but the people who had those answers were not willing to give them. They missed the chance to act before it was too late. When silence became the safer choice, the detective leans back in his chair and begins to explain how fear shaped everything that came after the shooting. He says that in the days following the attack, while Tupac was fighting for his life in the hospital, a different kind of battle was happening on the streets and inside the police department. People who might have talked suddenly stopped answering phones. Witnesses who seemed willing to cooperate disappeared or changed their stories. And even officers who wanted to push the investigation forward found themselves being told to back off. The detective describes how pressure came from multiple directions, from the top of the department, from politicians worried about the city's reputation, from powerful figures in the music industry who did not want their business exposed. He admits that silence became the safer choice for almost everyone involved. Talking meant putting yourself at risk. It meant becoming a target. It meant going against people who had money and power and connections that reached far beyond Los Angeles. For witnesses in the hip-hop community, cooperating with police could mean being labeled a snitch. And in that world, snitches did not live long. The detective talks about how even within the LAPD, officers started choosing their words carefully, filing reports that said just enough to cover themselves, but not enough to actually solve anything. Detectives who asked too many questions were reassigned, leads that seemed promising were suddenly deemed not credible. And the investigation that should have been the department's top priority became something people avoided. He explains that this was not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It was not one group of people planning together to cover up the truth. It was something worse, he says. It was a collective decision by hundreds of individuals to protect themselves by staying quiet, to let the case go cold rather than risk what speaking up might cost them. Tupac passed away 6 days after the shooting, the detective says, his voice heavy with regret. September 13th, 1996, he was gone, and with him went any chance of getting his version of what happened. The case officially became a homicide investigation, but by then the silence was so deep that breaking through it seemed impossible. The detective shakes his head slowly. Fear won, he says simply, and the truth became the casualty, the lie of an unsolvable case. The interviewer leans forward and asks the question that has been hanging in the air since the conversation began. Was this case really unsolvable, or was it just unsolved by choice? The detective meets the interviewer's eyes and does not look away. His answer is immediate and firm. It was not impossible, he says. It was unfinished. The case was solvable, absolutely solvable, but it required people to be brave enough to chase the answers that were right in front of them. It required the department to prioritize truth over politics, witnesses to prioritize justice over fear, and officers like himself to stand up even when standing up meant standing alone. The detective explains that within weeks of Tupac's death, investigators had strong leads. They knew which gang was likely responsible. They knew the names of people who were in Las Vegas that night. They knew about the confrontation at the MGM and how it connected to everything that followed. The pieces were there, scattered but visible, waiting to be put together by someone willing to do the work. But that work never happened, not really. The detective describes how the case was declared unsolvable almost from the beginning, how that label became an excuse, a way to avoid accountability, a shield against criticism. If the case was unsolvable, then nobody could be blamed for failing to solve it. It became a tragedy that was simply beyond anyone's control. He admits that he went along with that narrative for years. He told himself the same lie, convinced himself that some cases just do not have answers. But deep down, he always knew better. He knew that answers existed, that people knew exactly what happened and who was responsible, and that the only thing missing was the courage to pursue those answers to their conclusion. The detective's voice grows stronger now, more certain. He says that calling Tupac's homicide unsolvable was the biggest lie of all. It let everyone off the hook, from the officers who stopped investigating, to the witnesses who stayed silent, to the system that allowed a 25-year-old man to be unalived in the middle of a crowded city with no consequences for anyone. He looks directly at the camera now, his jaw set. The case was never unsolvable, he says. It was just easier to pretend it was than to admit we failed him. Saying it out loud, for the first time. The room feels heavier now, like the weight of everything that has been said is pressing down on both men sitting at the table. The detective takes a long breath, his hands clasped together tightly, knuckles white from the pressure. The interviewer waits, sensing that what comes next is the reason they are here, the truth that has been buried for nearly 3 decades. The detective begins slowly, his voice barely above a whisper at first. He says that he knows who was responsible for Tupac's death, not from rumors or speculation, but from evidence that was gathered and then quietly ignored. He names names, speaks about connections that were known but never pursued, talks about orders that came from people higher up the chain to let certain leads go cold. He explains that the shooting was retaliation for what happened at the MGM Grand, exactly what everyone suspected but nobody could prove in court, because witnesses refused to testify and evidence disappeared before it could be properly documented. The people responsible were protected, he says, not by some elaborate conspiracy, but by a system that chose convenience over justice. The detective admits that he was part of that system, that he followed orders when he should have questioned them, that he stayed silent when he should have spoken up. He watched as the case was slowly buried under paperwork and excuses, watched as the public was fed lies about how complex and unsolvable it all was. His voice cracks slightly as he continues. Tupac did not have to die, he says, and even after he was shot, the truth did not have to die with him. But it did, because people like him chose their careers over their conscience, chose safety over integrity. He looks exhausted now, drained from finally speaking the words he has carried for so long. This is what really happened, he says quietly. This is what I should have said 29 years ago. A confession that comes too late. The interview is winding down now, the recorder still running, the red light still blinking, capturing every word for a world that may or may not be ready to hear them. The detective sits back in his chair, looking smaller somehow, like confessing has taken something vital out of him. The interviewer asks him what he hopes will happen now, what he expects from speaking out after all these years. The detective shrugs, a tired gesture that says he has no illusions about what this confession can accomplish. He knows his words cannot bring Tupac back, cannot undo the pain his family has carried, cannot erase the decades of lies and misdirection, but he hopes, he says, that it changes how people see what happened. He hopes that the narrative shifts from unsolvable mystery to preventable tragedy, from conspiracy theories to simple truth. He hopes that other officers who know things, who carry their own secrets, might find the courage to speak before it is too late for them too. The detective talks about legacy, about how Tupac's music lives on, but his justice never came. He talks about how that failure belongs to everyone who had the power to do something and chose not to, including himself. He says he does not expect forgiveness, not from Tupac's family, not from his fans, not from anyone. He just wants the truth out there, he says, even if it comes too late to matter in the ways that count. The interviewer thanks him, reaches forward and stops the recording. The red light goes dark. The detective nods, stands slowly, and walks toward the door. Before he leaves, he turns back one last time. Tupac deserved better, he says, his voice steady and clear. We all failed him, and I am sorry. Then he is gone, leaving only silence and the truth behind.